And we're reading these reports that are coming in about, in Arizona, for example, the state police training for economic riots, and some 30,000 troops being moved into the U.S. to train for such riots. Of course, they're saying that they're going to be immigration riots that they're preparing for. And we're not conspiracy theorists. I mean, this is stuff that we're reading moving over the wires about some 200 detention camps. So this thing is in the United States that are empty. This is spinning out of control, and no one knows what to do. Survival is a key aspect that anyone should look at. And it's not about, hiding up in the hills with rifles and pork and beans. This is real. And it's way worse than it was in the past, because we have a growing underclass. You have, in major cities, they're not even graduating 50% of the students out of high school. And then their minds are whacked on crystal meth. Oh, yeah. You're going to have a wonderful conversation with these people when they're trying to blow your brains out and take everything that you have.
Another trend that you bring up, and I've seen this, 2 other people are forecasting the same thing, and that is a revolution. And you talk about it's not if, but when. And I wonder if you might begin this thought with your conversation with former Governor John Connally.
Yeah, it was in 1992, about a week or so before the elections. And John Connally wanted to meet me because of one of my books, Trend Tracking, in which I had forecast that there'd be a new third party and someone like Ross Perot would be the type of candidate. And of course, that was at a time when, 1988, when nobody thought such a thing was possible. And why I picked Ross Perot, I honestly don't know. But he was making the news a bit. And we were parked out in front of the, very brief part of the whole story, but we were parked out in front of the Dallas Book Depository right after lunch. This was John Connally's first time back since the assassination. For those people that don't know, John Connally was sitting in front of JFK and took a bullet in the back, went through his back and into his lungs, and out through his lungs, through his hand, through his knee. He was scrunched up in his seat, in a jump seat, sitting in front of Kennedy. And as Connally told a story, I'll never forget it. He said, I heard a gunshot. I looked over to my right. I knew it was a gunshot because I was hunting since I was a little boy. And he said, I looked over to my left, and he said he was wearing a dark blue suit that day. And he showed how he was scrunched up in the seat. And he said, I looked over to my left, and he said there were brains on my shoulder. He said, I know there were brains because my daddy was a butcher. And I never liked Connally from what I had known from him in the media. But that day I was taken by him, from lunch on, every word he was speaking was like a sentence. And it was one of those things I'm saying, I wish I had a tape recorder. I have a photograph, and it's in the Trends Journal. I just saw a much younger me standing in front of the book depository with he and his wife Nellie. And on the way back, I realized that Connally was a dying man because my father, may his soul rest in peace, had died of asbestos poisoning from working in the shipyards during World War II. And they had him on heavy doses of prednisone, for the lung inflammation. And Connally was experiencing the lung inflammation as well from the bullet wound from 30 years earlier. And he was on prednisone. I could see in his hands these big, ugly purple splotches and a stiffness in his gait. Same thing that happened to my dad. So I knew, this guy was on his way out. And I felt it from that point that I realized why I was so enthralled by what he was saying. He was speaking like a dying man. Whether or not he knew it, I don't know, but I knew it, and I'd seen it before. So as we're walking back into the Anatole Hotel, he looked at me and he said, I read your book. He said, it's a fine piece of work, and I know your heart's in the right place. He said, well, you don't have a clue what's going on, and neither do the American people, because if they did, there'd be a revolution in this country. And I knew what he meant because I had been around long enough. I began my career, I ran the mayoral campaign in Yonkers. I was the number 2 guy right out of graduate school in 1971. They sent me up to Albany. I was an assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate. It was the worst job I ever had. That's where I got to see grown men grovel. In politics, you suck your way up to the top. Oh, I hated that job. And then I was the government affairs specialist from 1973 to 1979 in D.C., and working part of the chemical industry. And I was there for the first, actually, energy crisis in 1973, and we're writing a trend alert about that right now, because what's going on in Israel may lead to the next kind of Arab oil embargo if this keeps going up. But anyway, I'd been around long enough, so when Connolly, I'd met Reagan, and I've seen enough. So when Connolly spoke those words, I knew what they meant. And now the time for the revolution is happening. There's no pretense of what America is anymore. You know, I heard President Bush say that he, what was the word he used about not being a free marketer anymore? And then we brought up all our lives to learn about free enterprise. And now we have the world's largest companies, the largest insurance companies, a government institution, the largest mortgage companies, government institution. We're buying up banks, motor companies, car companies. You could call it communism. That's what they called it when I was a kid growing up, when state-controlled monopolies. You could call it socialism or even fascism. But you can't call it free market capitalism. And they're robbing the people blind in broad daylight with these bailouts and rescue packages and so-called stimulus plans. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we think the when is going to start happening. The collapse is going to start happening around late February, early March.
Let's talk about, I guess, the hope that seems to have surfaced here with the election. And you call it Obama-Rama. The election, the hope, the euphoria that this is going to usher in a new era in politics. And yet, if you look at, as you point out, many of his appointees, both in the cabinets and elsewhere, are from the previous administration. And you say, what has changed? Nothing's changed. So there's a lot of hope right now. You think that hope is misplaced? Hope is the most negative word in the metaphysical dictionary. It's like these people going to play lotto, scratch-off numbers every day with their last $20 in their pockets. You hope that you win. By their deeds you shall know them. And all of Obama's deeds to date have proved just more of the same. You look at on the economic end, he's bringing in the old Robert Rubin team, Larry Summers, previous Treasury Secretary before Rubin under Clinton. I mean, Rubin, he was always this brilliant guy until they just let him go this week, walking away with $150 million. I guess he was brilliant, and running Citigroup helping to run Citigroup into the ground at a loss of over $20 billion. These are the people that dismantled the Glass-Steagall Act, the banking act that was put in place to stop the banks from becoming casinos, brokerages, and insurance companies, and these predatory practices. And they also dismantled many of the financial regulations that allowed these derivatives and credit swap defaults and all these things that nobody's ever heard of, another game at the casino. So to bring those people back and to expect to fix it, Timothy Geithner, the Fed, head of the president of the New York Fed, another Rubin protege, and to have the Federal Reserve now in the Treasury, can't anyone see what's happening? And so to think that the same people that caused the problem are going to fix it, I believe that's either a definition for insanity or stupidity, and that is to repeat the same things over again and expect a different result. And then when you look at his foreign policy team, well, if you think whether or not you agree or disagree, it's certainly no change. It's part of the Bush administration. As a matter of fact, Condoleezza Rice and Dick Cheney applaud Obama's national security team. So there's no change here. It's just a different face. The consequences of this, you sum it up. We call it the death of consumption. You call it economic slim fast. You are talking about Americans going on a diet, both spending and food. Let's talk about that. We're going to go back to Yankee frugality. We lost our way in this country. I talk about why this will be the greatest depression. And I go through the data. Most people didn't own homes. There was no such thing as a home equity loan. If you had what they called a second mortgage, you were a loser. People didn't own credit cards. And there weren't $14 trillion in total debt. And we had trade surpluses, and we had balanced budgets. We weren't $700 billion in the hole on trade each year. We're approaching $13 trillion in the hole on budget deficits. We become a consumption nation. 2/3 of our GDP is through consumption. We need to go back to what they used to call Yankee frugality. The way that people made it through the Depression is they were self-sustaining. They knew how to do things on their own. They weren't hoping that the government would save them. People knew better. They grew their own gardens. They fixed their own plumbing.